Hello. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. Hello, hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Amina Iro, and I am an editor at Legacy Lit. I'd like to welcome you all to the second session of Blackademics presented by Legacy Lit in partnership with Hachette Academic. Legacy Lit is an imprint of Hachette Book Group dedicated to publishing and championing diverse and powerful literature. To that end, the series Blackademics fosters ongoing conversations between our academic authors, creating a dynamic space for intellectual exchange and for their work to grow in classrooms around the nation. This afternoon's conversation is entitled Beauty, Bias, and the Blackboard and features Dr. Sarah L. Webb in conversation with Dr. Allison Powell Hicks, moderated by author Daria Burke. So a little bit about these brilliant women that you'll be hearing from today. I'm so excited. Dr. Sarah L. Webb is the author of Colorism, The Politics of Skin Tone and How We Get Free, and the founder of Colorism Healing. Her work has been featured on NPR, Fox, Forbes, and more. She holds a doctorate in English from Louisiana State University and previously worked as a tenure-track professor at the University of Illinois Springfield. Her earlier work includes teaching high school, freelance writing, and online editorial work for local TV stations. She lives in New York. And then we've got Dr. Allison Powell Hicks, who's the author of The Problem with Pretty, Beauty, Bias, and the Surprising Science of Good Looks. She's a beauty, mental health, and relationship expert and the founder of the Do Consulting Group. Dr. Ali hosted the acclaimed show Like Mother, Like Daughter on Discovery Plus and the Oprah Winfrey Network. She's also featured on shows like The Never Ever Mets, Family or Fiancé, Profiled, The Black Man, and Love and Hip Hop. She lives in Los Angeles, California. And today's moderator is Daria Burke, who is the USA Today bestselling author of My Own Making. That's Of My Own Making. She's an award-winning business leader, board director, investor, speaker, and advisor. Her creativity and impact have been recognized by Women's Wear Daily, Adweek, Forbes, Vogue, Teen Vogue, the CFDA, Town and Country, The Cut, and Nylon Magazine. She's written for Fast Company, The Huffington Post, Black Enterprise, and has appeared on the Melissa Harris Perry Show on MSNBC, Philly Speaks, and numerous podcasts. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Michigan and a Master of Business Administration from the New York University Stern School of Business. She lives in Los Angeles and East Hampton. Okay, now before we dive in, I want to pass things off to Celia, who's one of our co-hosts at Hachette Academic, for more info on how you can get the work of these authors on your bookshelf and, most importantly, in your classrooms. All right, Celia, off to you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the intro, and hi, everyone. My name is Celia Monroe, and I am the Academic Marketing Manager here at Hachette. Before we get started, I just want to give you a real quick overview of our academic program and what I do. So Hachette Academic is a part of Hachette Book Group, and this essentially means that I just work on all the books published all across Hachette and across our various imprints, including Legacy Lit. And I specifically work with universities to get our books in the hands of students and educators like yourselves. So with that said, I have compiled all of our really useful academic resources into one PDF, which you should see a link for on your screen, or if not, I'll also drop it in the chat. But either way, please click on this, read it at some point during the event, save it so that you can reference it later. But like I said, this includes everything that you'll need, all of our information, our contact info, useful forms and links, just everything you'll need to follow up with us after the event. Within that, you'll also find information on all the books that are written by the authors that you're going to hear from today, so you can also check those out. If you would like to receive a complimentary review copy of one or more of these books to review for your course or your program, you can do that with the link also included in this PDF. It's our exam and desk copy request form. It's super easy to fill out. All you'll need to do is put in your name and your university and all of your course information. And once you've done that, we're happy to approve this and get those books sent out to you. So please, please, please do that. We would really love for you to consider these books for your course. And to continue to promote the wonderful work that our authors are doing. So that's basically all I have for you. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. My contact info is in there as well, academic@hbgusa.com. And if you have questions that you also want to pop in the chat, I'm happy to try to answer those as well. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our wonderful authors to get us started. Thank you so much, and I really hope you enjoy the event today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I should say good afternoon to my friends on the East Coast. I'm with Dr. Sarah in LA right now. So good morning to my friends here on the West Coast. Allie, are you in LA right now too? Okay. So we good morning to our panel. Amina, you did such an incredible job with those introductions. And even though I know the bios of these incredible women, I was sort of blown away. And the one thing that I'll add, that if there was to imagine that something was missing from my bio, fun fact, I've spent the last 20 years, I'm now a retired CMO, but my career spanned beauty and fashion marketing for 20 years. And so I bring to this conversation not just an excitement to talk about these topics with two of my favorite experts in the subject matter, but sort of an interesting view as somebody who has both personal and professional experience in this space as well. So without further ado, we're going to get started. Just a really quick reminder for everyone to drop any questions that you have in the chat. We're going to go until about 11:45 Pacific, 2:45 Eastern. And so just under the chat box, there's a little bubble with a question mark. If you want to drop your questions there, we'll be keeping an eye on that. And then we can address them during the Q&A. There you can upvote questions and everything that as they come in. So keep an eye on that as we get started. Okay. So, this is such an interesting topic to me, and I'm so delighted to moderate it. So thank you to the Legacy Lit team for inviting me to have this conversation with Dr. Allie and Dr. Sarah, because beauty is something that, first of all, it obviously impacts all of us, and its role is so unique and interesting in this global system where its impact and scope span everything from psychology to sociology, economics, and even politics. And it often goes uninterrogated or without a lot of challenge. And yet, research has shown, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, that pretty people have an easier time making money, finding partners, and even succeeding in court, while people perceived as unattractive are often judged more harshly, they're treated more meanly, and they're seen as lower performing. And so we're going to get into what that bias looks like in meaningful ways. And so many studies have been done. This is especially true when we think about marginalized people. Some research out of both the U.S. Department of Education by Dr. Eric Ho, a statistician, and out of Berkeley, Sean Darling-Hammond, who's an assistant professor there. They lay out the case that Black students across this country, and so I'm going to just broadly say Black and Brown, but in this particular instance, Black students across the country in K through 12 education are experiencing scholastic punishment far more often than their peers. And we see that play out across school systems and other punitive systems and the pipeline between the two. And so whether you are educating PhD candidates or college students, or you're in the K-12 field and you deal with younger students, you can imagine the blast radius from this starting very early in their lives, in all of our lives, and the way that it plays out over the long term. And so with that, I want to try to talk about, I'm going to try to organize us around two main areas, and then a third that'll really, I think, hit home for everybody. And starting with this idea of identity, of self-image, and the psychology of beauty. Both of your books interrogate how beauty and color hierarchies are constructed and how these standards are learned very early through family, through media, myths, school. And it starts the moment that we're born, right? Cute babies get more smiles. They're held more, they're rocked more, they're tended to and fussed over more. And early childhood development says that our sense of self is formed to a significant degree by the age of 7. So starting with you, Dr. Ali, I would love your thoughts on, and it's really a big question, maybe this meta narrative of like, how do we develop our internal sense of self, even though our outward appearance is often first communicated to us through the outside world and through others?
Oh, that's an easy one. Oh my God, girl. Okay. Not easy. I love it though. And you're absolutely right, right? From the minute we get on this planet, we're being told who we are, how we're supposed to live. And a lot of it is rooted in things we didn't choose. None of us chose the bodies we showed up in, the racial or ethnic groups that we are a part of, or the ways in which society sees those groups. And you were saying like it starts at birth. Well, interestingly enough, it can even start before birth. When a mother knows if her child is a male or a female, she starts talking to it differently in the womb, right? So you already start the shaping really early on. And one of the reasons why we have this kind of like 7-year window where you learn like 75% of the things you're ever going to learn in these first 7 years is because you have to find a way to adapt and adjust to the culture you find yourself arising in. And so how do we develop a sense of me versus you when we are immersed in a culture that is attempting to tell us who we are? Well, a lot of times, not everyone does, right? And I think that's kind of the reality. And that's why we end up doing things like reading self-help books and going to coaching, going to therapy, doing the extra things to adjust so we can have more awareness. I think that's one of the first levels of all this is understanding and assessing, where did I get this idea? Where did I get this idea that there is something preferable from one complexion to another, one texture to another, size, height, race? Where did this idea come from? And I often say like the unexamined American life leans towards prejudice. If you don't examine the questions, the narratives that you're given, you will lean towards what the norm is saying. And we all know what the norm of this country is. And so awareness is kind of that first level of like asking yourself like, okay, I'm drawn towards, these particular types of shows, these particular types of things. Why is that? Because a lot of times we just assume that our thoughts are normal, typical, appropriate, the only way to think. And they're not. There's a million different ways to think about the same thing. And so when I'm working with clients, when I'm coaching, when I'm talking to organizations about it, I say like it's very important to challenge the culture within a company, the culture within yourself, looking at like what you were saying, the myths and the narratives that we were taught very early on from the time we're reading stories when we're children, Snow White, Cinderella. I mean, let's be real. Like Beauty and the Beast, I have the biggest problem with that. Y'all know that, right? You read the book. Did you read it? Y'all, that girl was sex trafficked. And we were all like, this is a beautiful story. She made him a gentleman. She kept his flower alive. It's wild. So the ways in which we do that is to challenge the narratives that we're given. And then towards the end of my book, I talk about the importance of understanding that my body is more than something to be ogled or to make men happy, right? I am actually a museum of the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that came before me. I'm a representation of every struggle, of every joy, of everything that they experienced. And I think when we make a pivot toward understanding why we're actually here, who we actually are in this life, aligning with our purpose, aligning with the beauty and the wonder and the sadness and the melange of everything that came before us in our ancestry, we start to see ourselves as more than a collection of parts, but as an interconnected person that deserves things in this world.
Oh, amen. Okay. I heard so much in that. And, I think the fairy tale industrial complex is absolutely part of the problem when we think about early childhood narratives. And I could go, down a long road just on the ways in which that sets women up for sort of using their beauty to justify the struggle, the ways in which, beauty, even in its benefits, which we'll get to in a second, and when we talk about sociologically and potentially economically, sort of the advantages of being perceived as beautiful, but also all the ways in which it's actually deeply oppressive, and the ways in which we operate in a system that still requires that you bargain and negotiate your own idea of beauty in order to participate in the systems that we're in, right? How do I make sure that I am attracting the right mate or being seen in the right light? But I want to stay with the early childhood piece of it for a minute, because you talked about, and I'm going to put some words in your mouth and also borrow from, frankly, both of our texts around heuristics and around sort of how we get acculturated to our own sort of sense of norms. And Dr. Sarah, I'm coming to you in a second as a follow-up to this, but for the uninitiated, we have, before we even think about the role that culture plays and the role our families play, our brains are wired to look for what is safe, what is true, and it relies on what's consistent and what it sees and hears most frequently. There's a part of the brain called the RAS, the reticular activating system. And the RAS is basically looking for things that we would call heuristics, right? Shortcuts to say this is safe, this is true, this is right. And this is how I perform and show up in order to be maintained within that. And so, it was really interesting, Dr. Sarah, to read in your book specifically the ways in which beauty politics start to manifest with students and the classroom. And obviously there's, we talked a little bit about sort of the downstream effects into adulthood, but even in the classroom, when we're talking small children, kids who are perceived as more attractive are believed to be more intelligent. They're expected to have better social skills. And, your story in particular about Miguel and Tristan really moved me. And, I would love for you to share that story with this group, and also think about, what do you want teachers and professors to understand about that developmental timing? And perhaps even some questions that they might ask themselves as they're thinking about how they're showing up in the classroom or challenging their own biases as they work with students.
Yes. So one of the challenges of being the third to speak is you want to respond to what everyone else said, as well as answer the question.
Please do. Please feel free.
Well, I have to agree with Dr. Ali that it can start even before you're born, even when parents are planning to conceive. They are dealing with the weight of, okay, well, if I have a child, I have to partner with a specific person so that my child comes out lighter skinned, so that my child has a certain hair texture. So before you're even conceived, your parents and their parents and your family are dealing with the pressures of these color norms, these color hierarchies and beauty hierarchies and norms. And then even when you're in the womb, again, once a mother realizes she's pregnant, there's the anticipation, I hope she has her daddy's hair, and I hope she has her mom's complexion, right? And so this is what a child is actually gestating in, right? Gestating in this bias. And I talk about how colorism is the kind of issue that compounds. So by the time a student gets to your classroom, they have had many, many years, especially if we're talking high school and college, right? They have had at least half a lifetime at that point of gestating and being nurtured in that kind of environment. And so one of the things we have to be aware of as educators is when we talk about differential instruction and education gaps, whether it be academic performance or behavioral infractions, there's also the gap in expectations that students have about how they will be treated, right? In education, a lot of times we talk about the teacher's expectations of the students. But when you've had a lifetime, starting from the womb and on, of expecting to be ignored, expecting to be mishandled, expecting discrimination, expecting teachers to have lower expectations of you, then that can also show up in our classrooms as well. And so for people who are interfacing with students in particular, is not just looking at, okay, where are they at in terms of their performance or their skill level, but also considering, why is this student not coming to my office hours, right? Why is this student not raising their hand and interjecting in class, right? And there are tactics, feminist pedagogy where you can ensure that all students participate and contribute, but also having that emotional intelligence and that political awareness of, if someone is used to taking center stage, if someone is used to being received well, if someone is used to being believed and given the benefit of the doubt, they're going to show up differently to a graduate seminar or even a high school group project than someone who's had the opposite experience, someone who's used to people ignoring them or disbelieving them or discounting their perspective. And so we can start to mitigate that, and knowing that these dynamics are already at play on day one of a semester or day one of the school year, we can start to put things in place to make sure that students' educational experiences in our classroom is better than maybe what they've had before.
Oh, yes. So I'm hearing a few things that I wanted to sort of double click into. The first was sort of the epigenetics of all of this, right? That predisposition toward whatever sort of response that we might have, whether it is positivity or negativity, being further influenced in the womb. That the ways in which and I talk about this through the lens of poverty and of my own making, but I think what you're saying is absolutely right in the same, that when you become accustomed to receiving less, having less, making do with less, whether that's attention or your basic needs being met, and other resources, then you essentially, it becomes self-fulfilling in its manifestations and how we show up in the world. But the other thing that you started to talk about, and I would love to hear from both of you on this, are some of those tools and ways in which, because awareness is step one, and we hope that this is sort of the foundation, that this can be ground zero for awareness, perhaps for some of you, although if you've signed up for this conversation, it's already perhaps on your mind. But at any rate, in any event, we've planted the seed of awareness that perhaps, it starts with just being intentional and thinking about having the cognition and the cognitive awareness around this idea that there are kids who are going to be, and I'm going to say kids all the way up to college, right? Who may already carry that posture despite the achievement, despite how far that they've gotten. What next? What do you do next? What are some of the questions that a professor or a teacher can ask themselves? How could they even consider approaching a student where they might observe some of that behavior? What are your thoughts on that?
So I'll take the opportunity to finish answering the question you asked me about Tristan and Miguel. So this is a scenario where when I was teaching high school, there was a set of fraternal twins. So they had very different skin tones. Well, not very different, actually slightly different skin tones, but also different hair textures. And this was before my explicit study in colorism, but I saw how, again, the sort of like the rich get richer, right? So the lighter skinned twin not only already came in with higher skills, higher grades, also greater popularity on campus amongst their peers as well as the teachers, right? And so that afforded them even more opportunities to shine and even more opportunities to excel. Whereas the darker skinned brother who I taught was again on this track, literally tracked in to remedial courses and just the expectations of like, oh, we're going to have to like write you up and there are dress code violations and you're going to have a lot of tardies and absences. And so the first thing we can do, and this is an audience of academics, is look at the data and track for ourselves, because none of us want to believe that we have bias. That could be very challenging for us to say, oh, I actually have been treating students differently. So what you can do is literally look at your grades, look at absences, and this is at any level of education. Look at, again, how many students are showing up to your office hours, who was turning in assignments, who's not turning in assignments. And for yourself, notice, is there a pattern amongst your students based on skin tone? Is it always the lighter skinned students who feel comfortable coming to my office hours? Is it always the lighter skinned students who feel comfortable emailing me and asking for additional support or asking for clarification? And ideally, we would not see a trend either way, right? It would be more of a random sampling, but we have to be willing, have to have the courage to look at our own data and look at our own receipts. And then the other thing is, once we are starting to ask that question is, okay, how can I sort of normalize and regulate opportunities for students to approach me? And so in addition to making sure you are approachable, right, regardless of what students look like, what their presentation might be, is sort of mandating office hours, right? So before we leave class today, everyone in this room is going to sign up for office hours next week, right? And so instead of leaving it on the student to feel confident enough, especially if we're dealing with freshmen or sophomores or people outside of their major, instead of expecting them, well, you should just be confident enough to go and ask your professor and go and talk to your professor. Make it a part of the assignment. Make it a part of the lesson. So before you finish this project, we're going to sign up for office hours. And then even in a classroom dialogue, in a classroom setting, what I've had professors do, which is very well, they hand out, whether it's a pencil or some other prop, and you have to give it away before you speak. And anyone who still has a pencil in their hand before the end of class, you have to give your pencil and either ask a question or interject or make a comment in class. And so there are ways to scaffold students' participation. And then the important piece is when they participate, when they show up to the office hour, now that you've instilled it in the lesson itself, is reinforcing that behavior. And so not being careful not to cut them down, not to shut them down, not to just let the comment pass without any feedback, right? But reinforcing that level of, I appreciate your participation. Let's build on this conversation in class. Come back to office hours next week. I want to follow up with you. And so not only building it into the structure of your lessons in your curriculum, but then making sure you give feedback to reinforce and encourage that behavior going forward.
I love that so much. And Dr. Ali, I know you were going to jump in. Dr. Sarah, really quickly though, will you just share with the group with that attention and your focus in understanding the differences between Tristan and Miguel and how they were treated? Can you just talk really quickly about what happened? What did you know, having gained that awareness, what did you do and what happened after that?
Yeah, so I only taught one brother. And so I think that makes a difference as well in terms of how I approached it. And so for me, it was realizing that one brother in my class was the one on the remedial track. He was darker skinned, had a kinky hair texture. And so I brought him in during extracurriculars and lunchtime to practice and to study and go over the study guides. And he had a friend with him, so they benefited from the buddy system because students want to look cool with their friends. And so just reinforcing that, but also having the opportunity to assess for myself when I'm dealing with other students as well. Like, is this a confidence level issue? Is this a compounding problem from earlier in their life? So not just the academic problem compounding, but again, his lower expectations for himself compounding. And so really, really having a hard time and really struggling to feel that sense of self-efficacy, feeling that sense of agency to be able to create a change. And so you build in small wins, right? Small ways, right? A project where I know you're going to be successful. And again, giving you that feedback. And so gradually introducing them to experiences that are positive and affirming and examples of success to build that muscle, because it could take, they spent years getting the opposite feedback. It might take the entire year before they feel like they can make progress or see an advancement in their academic career.
Yeah. There's a term that I use in my book called differential parental solicitude. And that is the term for when parents invest differently in different kids based on whatever their values are. So if we're in a family where the value is complexion, light complected versus browner complected, then that's the child that they're going to pour into, and that's the child that's going to have more benefit. And it kind of reminds me of like the Pygmalion effect, right? Where you hold a higher standard for a particular person, you give them more opportunity, you believe that they can do more. They begin to, through their own beliefs, like I can do this. It elevates their sense of mastery. And so I think that that's something that professors, teachers, and educators can start to do in their students is, like you were saying, like, let's look at the data. Am I actually favoring a particular type of student over another type of student? Because sometimes it also, our preferences, if we're not aware of them, our biases also align with our own identity. And it's like, oh, this kid reminds me of my son. Let me make sure we can take, and that's where like, that's like what nepotism is to a degree, right? It's like this whole idea of like, I want to just give to people who just look like me and remind me of me. And that's kind of walking through the world blindly. And so I think that being an educator that has done what, Dr. Webb has talked about. You've sat with yourself, you've analyzed the data, and now you come back with a sense of curiosity as you're sitting with each student. Because, sometimes you can kind of get caught in this trap of like, I've educated 10,000 students, I think I know what's going on. No, get inquisitive, get curious, don't make any assumptions, sit with this kid and see what's going on with them, right? Because even if a child presents, like, let's say with complexion, if a child presents as more fair-skinned, and you might think like, oh, maybe they don't have the exact same types of, challenges as a more browner complected child. But if they're the brownest in their family and they've been treated a particular way from their experience, if they appear attractive to some, but in their family, they're not, and they've been treated as the unattractive. So there's a in psychology, we call it phenomenology, right? There's that dance that we must do in every interaction because no two interactions will ever be the same. And so how do we bring our entire self to this present moment so we can be as open and available as we possibly can be? And that's why I think that bias process, assessing our biases, allows us to do that, because we don't come with too much pre-existing, like, top-down information, right? We're not coming with all of this like, well, I think I know exactly what's going on.
That's right. That's right. And gosh, I could go so far deep into this. I also am a little bit of an early childhood development nerd, but you touched on neuroplasticity and epigenetics, which is my jam. But I want to pivot a little bit to talk a bit about connected, but expanding this outward a bit more to talk about the sociology of the body. Black and brown women in particular, but I would say those with, otherwise marginalized beauty, those who are otherwise marginalized by beauty politics have started to assemble, and I would say over the last decade, maybe 15 years in particular, they've started to assemble and work really hard to articulate a beauty construct that includes us. Right. And in many ways, we have social media to thank for how these expanded beauty ideals have scaled, and they're influencing younger generations. And I'd like to think that some of the work that I did in my past life perhaps played a role in that. At the same time, though, students are also coming into the classroom already steeped in social media aesthetics like filters and Instagram face, which is an interesting and evolving concept in real time. We're watching it change. They're consuming skin lightening content and pretty privileged discourse. And we know, as you write, Dr. Ali, that being perceived as attractive is one of the most important social advantages that a person can have. So how can educators use your books, and this is really for both of you, to help students critically analyze digital culture without shaming them for the ways in which they've used it to try to survive and belong, right? And I say this, right, as we sit here all made up and nice and,
we did it.
Presentable, right? And so we're all participating in this in some way or another. But, specifically understanding how important and how pervasive in particular sort of the broader social sphere is vis-a-vis social media. Can you just speak to that and how educators can approach this?
I think the problem with pretty is kind of, I made it a little meta, right? I named it the problem with pretty. I made it pink. I made it simple, saccharine, and cute. So people would think like, oh, we're just going to talk about pretty privilege all day. But it's a book about perception, right? It's a book about perception through the vehicle of beauty. That is the mechanism we are using, because I think it's important to understand how the human brain works, how our current perspectives on consciousness, because don't get me started, we could have 25,000 conversations about all of the, did you know there's 450 different theories of consciousness out right now that are all active? It's wild. So I have a whole chapter on perception, and I dive into consciousness very gently, because if we don't understand the brain, then we don't understand the mind, which is a projection of the brain with which we do the perceiving. Because the only way in which we exist with the world is through the interpretations we make of it. And I like to talk to people about that, because I think it helps them distance themselves from this belief, because I think we have this belief that what we are seeing is actually what is there. And when the more you learn about perception, you realize that this pen might not actually be yellow. It's just the light waves that bounce off of it that my particular retinas perceive as being yellow. Because that whole yellow and gold, that gold and white dress, the blue and black dress, y'all remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw yellow and
Yes.
gold.
Yes.
It's actually blue and black. It was a mess. It was a mess, but it helped us see in real time that our perception can let us down. I talk about different illusions, the lightedness illusion, all these different illusions that impact the way we see very concrete things in the world. So let's go to something like Instagram face, right? I also in my book, I do a dive into evolution and how that has kind of, impacted some of the ways we see beauty and how society shifts. And I've been trying, it's about like every 7 to 15 years, we see trends very much so moving in and out of the zeitgeist. But we see kind of there's a slight cyclical nature to it. And so now we're still seeing this Eurocentric ideal. So that hasn't changed, but we're seeing it in hyperspeed. We are seeing kids as young as 13, 14, literally. Okay, are y'all hip to the looks maxers?
Yes, unfortunately.
There's a whole culture of kids that are buying growth hormone off of Amazon and injecting it into themselves. They're hitting themselves in the face with hammers because there's so much pressure to be AI, to be this perfect, unassailable version of themselves. Because on one hand, they're not crazy. That's what I tell my clients. That's what I tell people. You're not crazy for wanting to be beautiful, for wanting to be what this society keeps lying to us. Because again, perception, what we have been told is beautiful isn't necessarily beautiful. It's just beautiful for now. And if something can be beautiful 100 years ago, why can't it be beautiful today? And so I think that it's about destructuring what they believe is like the necessity. Like, oh no, I have to have this size waist and this complexion and this hair. No. You have to have your waist. You have to have your complexion. You have to have your hair, and you have to understand why you're doing the things you do. If you want to have, if you feel like you're going to get an advantage from doing a particular thing and you want to do that no matter what, fine. Just know why. So that's why I feel like I like to walk people from the beginning all the way up until this current moment, because I want people to start to understand why they make decisions. Like you're talking about heuristics, the thoughts that we think aren't necessarily our own. We adopt them, we absorb them, and we manipulate them to become what they currently are. And so who are we if we're not actually thinking our own thoughts? So I think it's important to get into that.
So the history of how we got here and helping students interrogate the ways in which beauty as we understand it changes, evolves, is a manifestation of the culture and where we are at a particular moment in time. It sounds like that's one way of sort of getting in front of it. Dr. Sarah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this. There are so many, I would say now over the last couple of years, experts coming out and just talking about the ways in which we limit digital access and we take phones out of students' hands. And I think that is part of the solution. I'm not a parent, but I agree that there is something to be said about just minimizing the exposure, but the exposure has been had. And so what else do we do? Is it media literacy? Help us understand some of the ways in which we can help students interrogate what they're seeing without villainizing the tools or the fact that we all use them.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of media literacy involved for sure, right? Media literacy has been a struggle even before social media. But as Dr. Ali mentioned, it's just the speed with which we need the urgency of media literacy now because of something like social media. But I always think about, and I'm a humanities person, so rhetorical analysis and media analysis, and it's a perfect, if you're thinking about using our books for your class, media analysis of film, television, reality TV, social media. And the underlying question is, well, what are the consequences of this? And so it's not about prejudging something like social media or a filter or a commercial as inherently or innately evil or bad, but we're constantly asking the question, interrogating, what are the consequences of this message? What are the consequences of this technology being used in this way? And not only what are the consequences of it, but what is the desired outcome for the people constructing this narrative? And we think about like the history, and I quote Malcolm X in the book, it's the power of imagery. They use their power to create images, and they use those images to mislead the people. And so we could talk about it from the lens of propaganda. If you're in a history class, looking at propaganda, cartoons and ads during wartime, and how literally we had to villainize the people, the continent, the culture of the people we're in war against in order to bring our country on board with that. And so how you exaggerate features, and you change their, their teeth, or you make their eyebrows a certain way. And so how we use something like beauty and skin tone and color, and this is great for journalism studies as well, right? And so when we want to depict someone as committing a crime, they're the villain, we darken their skin tones, right? We enhance their features and that sort of thing. And so doing a lot of the questioning, okay, well, what is the outcome of these choices? What is the result of these choices? And who does that harm and who does that benefit? And I think students can start to unpack. So it's not that I can't enjoy wearing makeup and experimenting with features, but I now have the self-awareness to know, okay, what's the intention behind this? Who stands to gain if I do play into this and participate, and then who stands to be harmed, including myself, right? Am I potentially harmed if I participate in this? And so helping students learn to ask questions and not take things for granted, I think, is a way to get them to engage and participate. And you can't absolutely use the things that they love and say, you love this, and it's great that you love it and you enjoy it, but do you actually understand it? And sometimes understanding it deepens your love for it, right? Makes you appreciate it that much more, right? As I'm sure you understand with beauty and fashion, it's when you have that nuanced understanding that you can take your appreciation of those things even further.
Yes, and it makes me think, go ahead, Dr. Ali, please.
I think that's one of the deepest lessons I did learn from grad school, is this idea of how to think, not what to think. And I feel like that's like at the core of what you were saying, right? It's not about telling them like, these are the 5 things that are racist and always this and that, but it's like, well, let's teach you when it comes to beauty, when it comes to aesthetics, when it comes to the world in which we live in, how do you process the way that impacts you? What do the consequences look like? Because every single thing that happens in our lives reshapes us. Our memories are forever different. I will be forever different for having experienced this with you right now. All of us being on this call, our brains for the rest of our lives will be changed and shaped, because what fires together wires together. And so we have to be conscientious about, what are these things I'm exposing myself to? Why are they here? Who benefits? And why do I want to participate?
I love that. And so helping students understand how to think by interrogating and analyzing, whether it's history, whether it is the way, character portrayals and stories and film, even, conversely, thinking about it from a business case study perspective, I think about something like My Black is Beautiful, which was a platform that emerged in like 2006. And initially it was really sort of born out of this idea of just that Black is beautiful and my Black is beautiful. And it went from a mantra to sort of a platform, and then eventually adopted by Procter and Gamble, who took it on and said, we're going to actually scale this out. And it became a product line. And I think it wasn't until 2023 that they actually decided to fold that part of the business, for reasons largely outside of this conversation, but not completely, in that they were centering it a lot around hair care trends that were no longer relevant for Black women. And so centering a lot still around relaxers and other product categories that have been downtrending. But that aside, I think it's a really interesting way to also look at the economics of this question and think about the ways in which culture and marketing together can actually move us forward. And the fact that both of you sort of quickly understood and remembered that platform, I think it speaks to the power of the positive as well, right? I think so. Just rounding that out for the audience, I think, there's so many case studies that you can assemble and think about this holistically, whether it's through psychology, through media and film, through history, through business case studies. And I love that we sort of offered a smattering of those. Dr. Ali, what were you going to say?
I'm sorry, I could talk all day, because they inherently understand, and they being the nebulous they, always the bad guy, they understand the inherent power in seeing yourself represented. Like what Malcolm X was saying in that quote, right? They understand the more you see your image. So in my study, in the book, I found that the higher a Black woman's ethnic identity, the higher her levels of perceived control over her body.
Yes.
And Black women had higher perceived body control than white women. And so the jump I make, it's a jump. This is a self-help book. The jump I make is that inherently hiding a person's ancestry, hiding their lineage, hiding who they were before places their body in someone else's control, potentially. In the control, in the hands of the marketers, of the, production, of the plantation, of whomever. And so I think it's up to us right now as educators, as people, as researchers, to help people gain more control over their lives than less.
Amen.
Yeah.
And,
I want to add to that as well.
Okay. Yes, please do. And then I have one more question for you before we go into questions.
Yes.
But please.
It's when we're talking with students about things like media and social media, is reminding them that once you have this understanding and this framework for how these things are constructed, you too then have power to create the narratives you want to see out in the world. And so it's not just analysis of what everyone else gets to do, but now I get to apply these same tools to create a post that is actually affirming and uplifting, or to write an article, or to create a short film that changes the narrative, that changes the game. And as Dr. Ali is saying, makes me more visible and represents myself in a way, in my culture, in a way that I want to be forced and front and center.
Amen. That was literally the center of my business school application essay, and wanting to go into beauty specifically for that reason. This was 20 years ago when I started at Stern. And so it absolutely, I think, has material impact on how kids see themselves and the choices that they make long term, and the role that they sort of play, the agency that they feel in being a part of the change that we want to see. So I love that. And it allows me to sort of move quickly into our last section, which is, we've been generally talking about deconstructing beauty and bias in the classroom, but I want to get just a little more tactical for a moment before we open it up to questions. I imagine that everyone here has sort of moved through whatever skepticism may exist around this being a somewhat frivolous idea, right? That beauty, color, desirability are somehow not essential or worth studying, that, these are ultimately sort of vanity projects. I want to hear a little bit about how you've handled institutional pushback on your work or support, and how it shaped your work. Paint a picture too of, like, if you could imagine a space, a school, a university that had really absorbed a lot of the lessons and research of your books, what would look and feel different? And what advice, we'll end on this, what advice would you give to the audience who may be navigating the bias that this is perhaps not worth getting into in the classroom?
Listen, I think beauty and color and texturism, I think it is all touchy conversations. People get scared around them. They're very naturally scared, which I think inherently speaks to their power, right? I tend to look at the blankness. When I get a map, I try to see what's the part that's missing. What's missing from this, right? I do talk probably too much in my book about my whole dissertation process and trying to get my dissertation accepted. And I was like so worried about it. But then when that whole Cheyenne Bryant thing went off, I was like, whew, glad everyone knows my dissertation's out there. But I wrote about it so much because it was so traumatizing. Basically, I wanted to be a fashion designer my entire life. My parents were like, baby girl, you getting a PhD. So, so I get into this grad program. I'm panicking. I don't know what to research. Should I be the attentional eye blink girl? What should I go into? And my dad was like, why don't you just do fashion, study aesthetic? And I was like, So I put my study together, and I went to the baddest professor we had, man. She was great. She just came from an Ivy League school. I went to grad school out here in Loma Linda in California. And she literally was like, you should be kicked out of the program. She was like, this is not serious. This is not rigorous. And I am dramatic, if you can't tell. I have been very constrained on this call. I'm really trying to be so appropriate. I blubbered, went to my car, fainted in the seat, cried, was devastated. But I ended up finding a way to make it something that was, appropriate. I found a wonderful mentor. I think mentorship is important. Finding people who value and lean into you, and not having that tendency to want the unavailable person to be your person. but finding the person that actually aligns with you, the person that's right under your nose. My supervisor, Gloria Cowan, poured into me, and she is stone cold one of the best people I know. And so that gave me the bravery to actually study something that I think is fundamentally very important, because I think that when you walk into a room, people make an assumption of who you are within 10 milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with your education, with how much money you make, with anything. It is all about the shape of your body, face, hair, the color, the smell. And so I think this is actually one of the most fundamentally important things, because it unconsciously shapes us. And so I think with the pushback, because I understand when you're in academia, you always can't leave and just go somewhere else and start over. Like, I get it. But I think passion projects may be something on the side, making it work.
I love that. So find the cheerleaders, find the helpers, and explore this by any means. What would you say?
For me, the pushback, the pushback was interesting because it's colorism is seen as diminutive or trivial and secondary to racism specifically. And so in academia and in activist spaces and the broader culture, it's like, okay, let's get over this little thing so that we can get back to the serious business of racism. And I challenge that in the book, as you can imagine, and hopefully debunk it. You'll just have to read it to see for yourself how successfully I do that. But how it's impacted my work is, one, realizing that all of these like spaces for race scholarship on racism aren't necessarily interested in having this conversation, right? And so we're like, oh yes, this is a great podcast. This is a great conference. This is a great, project to join or submit to. And those people are like, no, we want to construct a particular kind of narrative that centers this issue, and we don't think that that's appropriate. And then what's interesting is that in those spaces, a lot of the people at the forefront of these conversations are either men or they are lighter skinned Black people. And I'm like, that seems, it's precisely why we need to have this conversation in this particular space or in this particular setting. But the work has to constantly come up against this question of, okay, but how does this distract from racism, or how does this, help us get free of racism? And what I say is that we can't get free of racism without going through colorism, right? And so having to make that argument is just kind of the rhetorical work that I have to do when I'm talking and teaching about colorism. But I think once we see progress on colorism, the slow progress we see in racism is going to start to alleviate itself. Right. And so we like, why do we keep beating up our heads against a brick wall trying to end racism? It's because we're not addressing colorism. And so a university, a school, a classroom that finally addresses colorism will see much quicker, much more effective, much more deeply rooted results across all issues of equity and injustice.
Absolutely. And amen. Hallelujah. And not the least of which, that we are a part of a global majority. This is a global issue. And so we have the collective power to actually get to the heart of this by looking at colorism. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to pivot over to questions. Dr. Ali's like jumping out of her seat. But we're gonna tackle some of this with the Q&A. So we've got 3 questions in here, and Maya, let me know if there are some other questions that are outside of the Q&A box. Let's see. Can you speak to beauty standards internationally? It's a great pivot off of what I was just talking about, and how it impacts conversations across cultures. We have so much access to people all around us and use social media as a learning tool. What should we all be keeping our eyes open for us to be better together? Thanks, Amina.
Well, I think that almost kind of goes back to colorism in a way.
Yeah.
Because what I was thinking earlier was leaning back into perception, that we're bad perceivers and we make mistakes all the time. So we actually don't know a person's race.
Right.
The person's race is whatever you perceive it to be, and you could be wrong.
Hello.
That's right.
Hello.
That's right.
Wrong.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people use color, especially in our culture, as a vector and a mechanism for judging a person's race. And I mean, because I just did a DNA test, and y'all, I was sure I was something else. So I was like, I had to change my own identity. But so now that we're in this, I read this book in grad school, The World is Flat. It was talking about how technology was creating this beautiful, this flattened Earth, this more globalized planet, where now we're going to be interacting with people of other cultures. And I think, and I'm hoping this is going to answer the question, but I think what the risk we run into here in the US, the thing that I've seen over and over again, is kind of this lack of epistemic humility, that we kind of believe we know everything about racism. We've studied it so many times. So we're going to talk about the Black experience, the brown experience, and this experience. But then we go to another culture and they're like, we don't have that here like that. Black doesn't mean that here. It means something else. Like even the conversation with Tyla, right? Where she was talking about being colored, and people were really upset because in the United States, colored is not it's a horrible thing to say. But for her and her culture, it was an entirely different identification. Right? It's an entirely different cultural group. And so I think that there's a level of humility we also have to have. And I'm kind of going back to a previous question, and a level of curiosity to say like, well, help me understand, because I'm chronically on TikTok and I've seen the diaspora wars and what's happening between like some of the West Africans, the Nigerians are getting into it. The folks that are in England the British folks are getting into it. The Americans are getting into it. And instead of coming together and sharing aspects of our culture, of our ethnicities, of the things that we have in common, we're kind of fighting and saying like, oh, well, you don't understand racism. We have the only And so I think that there's a space for us to all take a deep breath and realize that everyone is dealing with something. And that a lot of it aligns with colorism.
No, that's true. And it kind of brings me to the next question. I've seen it come up in the broader chat and then in the Q&A as well. You hit on this a bit, Dr. Ali, in talking about how we rely on phenotypes to help us understand what we think a person's race is, which makes me think a bit about texturism as well. And it's a couple of the questions here that get at texturism and how it shows up in various spaces. And so one question on this topic is just the broader sort of question, and maybe Dr. Sarah, you can take this, engaging with this idea of texturism. And then the other question, same sort of general idea.
No, so they do connect really well, because when I travel when anyone travels to another country, as particularly like the first thing people see is your skin tone and your hair texture, right? And I even say like, if the police pull you over because you're Black, how did they know you were Black? Not your birth certificate, not what you checked on the census. It's your phenotype. And so when actually the international conversation and questions around texturism and colorism are transfer more easily in a multicultural context than race, because how race is defined, how race is understood, the legality of race, the history of race is so different from country to country. But one thing that tracks internationally is that my skin tone, regardless of how you define race in your country, you see my skin tone, you see my hair texture. And hair texture in particular, I talk about trying to get a haircut in Brazil, right? It's hard for me to get a haircut even in the United States. But when traveling internationally, it's like, okay, you need to go over there to the women's salon, but they're all getting blowouts and using curling irons. I'm like, no, actually, I came to the barbershop because I know what I want, right? And so thinking about the intersection of what I call racialized features. So we have a myriad of physical traits, physical features, but there are certain ones that are uniquely tied to our understanding and perception of race. And hair and skin tone are some of the biggest ones. But hair is particularly interesting because it's more easily changed and transformed, right? You can technically lighten your skin with products, but it takes months. It takes a long time. It's very dangerous, but you can go from an afro to a silk press literally overnight. And so it is one of the biggest levers that people have used, particularly women, in the politics of beauty and the politics of colorism and texturism and that sort of thing. And so I think that is those two questions together, texturism and colorism, actually transfer really well in an international context, even more so than the question of racism.
Absolutely. I love that. Okay, last question before we hand it over. Were there special or specific personal incidents, you both share this in your book, that directed you towards this important, very necessary work? And you spoke about this when you talked about your dissertation a bit, Dr. Ali. But maybe briefly, you can also just talk about even those earlier images of your mom and sort of the comparison there. And Dr. Sarah, you've shared a lot about how your family dynamics and having lighter skinned siblings played into your own self-perception. So maybe both of you can quickly tackle that from a personal perspective.
Absolutely. I grew up in Orange County, California. It was a vibe. I was the only, me and my family and some of our like close friends were like the only Black people around. And so that's why earlier I was talking about, it's like about comparison. I consider myself a middle toned person. I'm right in the middle of the diaspora almond, but in my family, I'm the darkest. I am the brownest in my family on most sides. My grandfather was a little more brown than me, a lot more brown. And I think I have perception problems because I be thinking I'm brown, brown, brown. Like I be hanging out with people, I'm like, yeah, me, I'm one of that. They're like, I don't know about that. But in my childhood, being Black in an all white school in the 80s and the 90s was not okay. And people talked about it, you know, when you read my book, like third paragraph in, you get a full hard R N word, okay? Because that's what I was called. And so I for a period of time used to keep Comet in my shower when I was in junior high because I wanted my mom to believe that I was like cleaning the shower all the time. I was actually trying to bleach my skin. So I would use Comet on my skin in the hopes, because I was also very outdoorsy. I played a lot of sports. I was very athletic. And so my complexion could range and I just didn't feel good in my skin until my mom's from Germany. And we went on a trip to Europe for my senior class trip for my graduation gift. My mom took me and I spent an extended period of time there and saw so many different people that weren't just Orange County white folks. No shade to Orange County white folks, but I came back and then I went to an HBCU and I didn't worry about my complexion after that. Mm-hmm. I was like, it's a part of the diaspora. It's a part of this experience. And it was just that moment for me was pivotal. And I don't know where I would be if I hadn't had it.
Mm. Yeah. For me, the personal story I'll share is also a professional story. There are so many stories we could tell, but what prompted me to do this work is being a high school teacher and hearing my Black American students say things about their skin tone and other people's skin tone that were negative. And what I thought was just me, or maybe just my generation, was right. I was confronted with it that no, this is persisting in yet another younger generation. And so hearing them say things like, oh, I'm less proud of myself because I got darker over the summer, or I don't like this photograph because I look too Black on here, or I wish I was light skinned like my mom. And so hearing a younger generation repeat these ideas and these biases and these beliefs that I thought, you know, was maybe just a my generation thing, I realized like, oh, okay, this isn't going to go away if we don't explicitly address it and explicitly talk about it. And so I did my part as a writer and educator, and here we are 15 years later.
I'll jump in really quickly and add my own personal story if I can. I grew up in Detroit, so I grew up in a very Black city. To a biracial mother, but was raised in a Black family, and as a decidedly sort of Black experience. But my mother definitely had a lot of colorist and texturist sort of things that would just show up in how she would favor my sister over myself. I was a smart one, and my sister was the pretty one. And so that, I heard that a lot growing up. And it's interesting because I think initially I sort of went into beauty understanding that you could perform it, that you could manufacture it, that you could own it, that there was agency in that it wasn't necessarily a byproduct of needing to contort or shift oneself to become something that would be acceptable to others, but that you could actually feel really good about yourself by how you develop yourself through that. And so it really became an act of self-love, thinking about how to sort of show up and take care of myself in a way that I felt really proud of how I presented. And then when I learned that there was this whole big beauty industry, it felt like a no-brainer when I decided to go into it. And I shared a bit earlier that my mission was really about representation and about sort of breaking the fourth wall to the extent that we could. And I did that at brands like Lancome and Estee Lauder. And so, I was definitely going in with a bit of an uphill battle, but it was more important to me to fight for more shades of foundation for double wear, way before Fenty. than it was to necessarily join the conversation around, Black hair, which was really where Black beauty lived for many years. So that's how I got into this work. But we are over time a little bit, and I want to make sure that I hand it back over to, I think, Amina, who's going to close us out. Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you so much for your time and your passion, for your incredible books. You see my bookmarks and my tabs and all these things for these gorgeous and important bodies of work, to help us think more about this. I think as individuals, as parents, as caregivers of children, and certainly as educators and people who are leading this kind of work at scale. So thank you all, and thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Dr. Sarah L. Webb, Dr. Allison Powell Hicks, and to Daria Burke, our incredible authors. I always tell people, our team at Legacy Lit, and really anyone who I can grab their ear, that for me as an editor, I love publishing books, and we love publishing books at Legacy Lit that really bring people out of the margins of their own communities. And for me, it's not enough ever to just have one kind of person from each group on our list, on our syllabi, in our friend groups, and in our lives. And I think this conversation shows why that idea is so important, because by learning about each other, we really deepen our sense of humanity. So thank you all so much. And I'm sure you're getting tons and tons of love in the chat too from folks who've been greatly impacted by our talk today. And so I hope everyone enjoyed, and most importantly, that you consider adding these fantastic books, Colorism, Of My Own Making, and the problem with pretty, to your syllabi, curriculum, or class bookshelf. You can use the link just below or the link in the chat to request a desk or exam copy for course adoption consideration, and keep an eye out for more information about our next Blackademics event. Thanks so much for joining in, and have a great afternoon, everybody.